Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun Cho. The United States aims to make as much progress as possible before the second summit with North Korea. Today, we take a look at how the working level officials should lay the ground for the Hanoi summit.
Our discussions were productive. We have some hard work to do with the DPRK between now and then.
We are aiming to get as far down the road as we can in what's now a couple of weeks.
In the studio with me today, Ambassador Joseph Ditrani, former special envoy for the six-party talks during the Bush administration. Ambassador Ditrani also served as the director of National Counter-Proliferation Center. Also joining me today, Mr. Scott Snyder, director of U.S.-Korea Policy Program at the Council on Foreign Relations. His latest book, South Korea at the Crossroads, charts the evolution of South Korean foreign policy and strategic choices. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Nice being here.
Ambassador, Special Representative Beacon was in Pyongyang for 3 days, and reportedly the two sides only laid down their positions and didn't get into negotiations. So what is your assessment of the last round of working level talks?
Well, I think it's great that our Special Representative Beacon did meet with his counterpart. It's been 7 months before this meeting took place. Mm-hmm. Now he had a meeting with the new representative from the DPRK. I think Kim Hyuk-cho has the credentials for being a good interlocutor. I think it was good. I think it made sense for both sides to put their positions on the table, for the United States to say what we mean by complete denuclearization, complete verifiable, irreversible dismantlement of all nuclear weapons and weapons facilities, but also a verification protocol. It's important for North Korea to understand what we mean by the terms we use. Indeed, that refers to the June 2018 joint statement with President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. And it's important for the United States also to hear from North Korea. What do they mean by security assurances? What are they looking for when they talk about economic development? What do they mean by that? So I think they weren't negotiations per se, but each side at least was able to put on the table what they're talking about and what their expectations are. I think that's progress.
Mm-hmm. And Scott, Special Representative Beacon laid down around a dozen agenda items when he was there. So does this mean that now we're finally getting into the specifics?
Well, I think we probably are trying to get into specifics. I mean, we have to remember that we're only 2 weeks away from this summit meeting. It's important that both sides are able to produce some kind of joint statement and action plan that would come out of the summit. Otherwise, I think that the summit will be looked on as a repeat and as a failure. And so there are expectations for what will be produced, but there is not that much time. And I actually think you could hear a little bit of urgency in Secretary of State Pompeo's voice as there is an amount of time that is very limited in advance of this critical meeting, which is really, I think, going to be make or break for this process.
Mm-hmm. And Ambassador, what the U.S. side shared with the South Korean side is that the big picture of denuclearization is first dismantlement of Yongbyon and then get the full declaration, including the nuclear weapons, and then the complete denuclearization. We do not know if this is for real, but then this whole idea, what is your take on this idea of the big picture?
Well, being Kim Jong-un has put Yongbyon on the table, Yongbyon was on the table with the joint statement of September 2005 from the six-party talks. I think it's logical that we would look at Yongbyon, and I think Kim Jong-un putting Yongbyon on the table showed trust and at least a willingness to show he's prepared to negotiate. So I think that's a good step. But as you correctly stated, there's more than Yongbyon. There are other facilities outside of Yongbyon, plutonium, highly enriched uranium facilities, so it has to include the above. But I think Yongbyon would be a good first step, whereby we can have monitors go in and observe the actual dismantlement and eventually abandonment of the facility. As you know, it has both plutonium and uranium capabilities within Yongbyon.
And Scott, on this broad roadmap, how far do you think the two sides can go in the working level talks set to be held in a couple of days?
Well, we want to go as far as we can. I think there's a wide range of possibilities still for what the summit will deliver. I think that the critical thing that has to occur is that there has to be a roadmap, and there has to be some set of actions, possibly symbolic actions, but still important, including things like inspections of Yongbyon for some kind of measure on the U.S. side, either very narrow sanctions lifting or a step toward peace. And I think that the hard part, it seems like right now, is figuring out what the right corresponding measure would be for the U.S. to offer that is acceptable to the North Koreans.
And one of the ideas being floated is to take away North Korean materials, nuclear materials and weapons overseas. Why is this a good idea?
Well, first of all, we need to get the weapons, the nuclear weapons. And when we look at negotiations with North Korea, and again, I'll go back to the six-party talks, we had an agreement. We always talked about nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons facilities, then also the personnel who worked on those facilities, because that's all important. That's a continuum. So getting the nuclear weapons out, now it's a question of dismantling those weapons, making those weapons inoperable. Do you do it in North Korea or do you do it outside of North Korea? That's an option. I think that's where the experts have to come in. And usually to do that, it would not be IAEA monitors. It would be those nuclear weapon states, i.e. the United States, Russia, China, that are participating in these negotiations. They would have the responsibility of, if you will, making those nuclear weapons inoperative, whether they do it in North Korea or outside of North Korea, that's to be determined.
And also, as Ambassador just mentioned, the U.S. side actually wanted the list of nuclear scientists of North Korea. Why do you think we need this at this point?
Well, I think the importance of getting the names of nuclear scientists is really related to concerns about nonproliferation, because if we have the names of those scientists, then it's easier to track their potential travels or other work that could be done in other countries or with other countries on nuclear programs. So that, I think, is the significance of getting that kind of information.
And Ambassador, there are detailed steps in denuclearization. What do you think will be the most sticking point at this point when the working level meeting officials meet together?
Well, it's one thing for North Korea to put Yongbyon on the table. It's another thing to also say we're prepared to make other sites available. Therefore, I think the most important point, and we had this issue again with the six-party talks in 2008, is the verification regime. Well, North Korea agreed to a verification protocol that permits nuclear monitors to leave, if you will, declared sites and visit non-declared suspect nuclear sites. That's key. That means reasonable time. They would give the names of the facilities they'd like to visit and the reasons for that. This is normal. It's normal procedure. Well, that was one of the sticking points for the six-party talks. I think this is going to be very critical, to have monitors visit suspect, non-declared nuclear sites.
Senator Ed Markey said this week, which really stuck with me, is that any agreement without verification is a hallucination. What is your take?
I totally agree. I mean, President Reagan going back, trust but verify. I think it has to be verified. There's no question about that. That's why the monitors and the role of initially the IAEA monitors, but then when we get to the weapons, it's going to be, if you will, the U.S., Russia, China, those nuclear weapon states, those monitors going in and actually dealing with the particulars, the weapons and the facilities, and also the personnel. It's as you know, as Mr. Snyder said, it's a proliferation issue with the to monitor these, if you will, if the travel of these nuclear scientists. But it's also important to sit down with them and to get their view on, you know, what are the facilities, what are your views, and so forth. So I think there's a lot of experience here, and the IAEA has a lot of experience, and North Korea and the U.S. indeed do. So I think it's going to be a good process if North Korea is prepared to go this far.
Well, and I think that it's important that over the course of the past year, the North Koreans, by doing some kinds of limited verification, are recognizing that verification has to be part of the process. But now they need to be socialized to international standards of verification that have to be met for the process to be credible. And so that is where we are. And then, you know, the other issue is how do we get beyond Yongbyon? Steve Biegun called Yongbyon non-essential. And I think that just indicates that the core of complete denuclearization has to be defined as the entire scope of the program. We can't do limited denuclearization at Yongbyon and call it complete denuclearization.
And Mr. Snyder, you mentioned about what would be U.S. corresponding measures, and Secretary Pompeo actually emphasized the need for the security and peace mechanism on the Korean Peninsula. And the Japanese media reports that actually the U.S. side floated the idea of non-aggression declaration to North Korea because the end of war declaration would take so many parties to discuss and get resolved in a short time. So is this a good starting point to have a non-aggression declaration?
Well, it could be, but what I really see is a kind of mismatch maybe between what the U.S. is willing to offer and what the North Koreans really want. My impression is that the North Koreans are really looking for tangible sanctions lifting measures. I think that what President Trump wants to do is to make peace on the Korean Peninsula and all of the acclaim that would come with that. And so the question is, how do you find the right corresponding measure that can satisfy the needs and expectations of both sides?
Mm-hmm. And regarding the sanctions lifting, the U.S. side is very clear that sanctions lifting will only come after denuclearization steps. So at this point, when North Korea really wants this sanctions lifting, what can the U.S. do?
Well, there are a number of things. And let me go back to what Mrs. Snyder said about the non-aggression pact, your question. I think that's important. We had that in the six-party talks, a non-aggression pact. A declaration that we do want to see a peace treaty that ends the Korean War. I think these are important for North Korea. But again, as you indicated, sanctions lifting is important for North Korea. They're talking about economic development assistance. With the sanctions in place right now, the UN Security Council resolutions that impose those sanctions, those are binding sanctions. So there needs to be some workarounds. What other opportunities? If you're going to implement those sanctions and say they need to be in place until there's complete verifiable denuclearization, North Korea then will say, well, how do we get economic development assistance in the process? So the workarounds around those sanctions are going to be very important. It could relate to energy assistance, which North Korea needs. We were building 2 light water reactors at Kumho. Maybe it could be the resumption of the construction of these light water reactors, or other means to get energy and humanitarian assistance into North Korea while still abiding by those sanctions that are on the books.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Chairman Kim mentioned about resuming tours to Mount Kumgang and Kaesong Industrial Complex in his New Year's speech, which shows that he really wants this. And do you think there's a chance that U.S. will give this as a concession in the second summit?
It's really hard to tell, but what I like about that idea is that it ties something that the South Koreans are interested in giving to the negotiations. And that is actually going to bring the U.S. and South Korea together a little bit more, because if Kumgang and Kaesong are a part of the denuclearization process, as well as part of economic development, then it means the U.S. and South Korea have to work together. And I think that it's important for the North Koreans to also recognize implicitly that U.S. and South Korean interests are both tied up in this process, both to achieve economic development and to address denuclearization as part of the process of achieving economic development.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, we don't really have so much time left until the second summit. And if the working level officials fail to make great breakthroughs, since this is a top-down diplomacy, can the 2 leaders at least can make a breakthrough when they meet?
Well, I think that the 2 leaders can make a breakthrough. The question is whether it's going to stick. And one of the issues that we have on both sides is the question of how well integrated are the leaderships with their working level government bureaucratic counterparts. And the fact of the matter is that it's important for the leaders to work together, but it's also important for the bureaucracies to follow the leaders' wishes in a way that really moves things forward. And with North Korea, the devil truly is in the details.
Mm-hmm. And Ambassador Ditrani, what do you think?
Well, I think he needs to reconfirm to the president that he's committed to complete denuclearization. He knows we mean complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantling. I think he needs to make that clear to President Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. So after that 7 months, are we finally on the right track now, do you think?
I think we're on the right track. I think this summit will be successful. If indeed Chairman Kim Jong-un commits to complete verifiable dismantlement of nuclear weapons and a verification protocol. And if the U.S. commits to providing those security assurances and economic development, I think we are on the right path. If there's a hiccup with any of the above, it will not be a successful summit.
Mm-hmm. And last question, what should we be mindful going into the second summit?
Well, really what we're focusing on is pace, price, and process. Getting a process is essential, but what they're really negotiating right now, I think, is pace and price. And so, the question of how much each side is going to pay in order to move forward, and then really how quickly are we going to be able to get this done. We're really, I think, in the second inning of a 9-inning game, with the Singapore summit having been the first inning.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll end our conversation here and watch video for our next discussion.
While we have made significant progress over the past year, North Korea remains the most immediate challenge.
Meaning that we have observed no significant changes to size, scope, or timing of their ongoing exercises compared to the same time period over the last 4 years.
Top military commanders echoed intelligence assessment that North Korea is unlikely to give up all its nuclear weapons. They also pointed out North Korea has made little changes to its military posture. Now, Mr. Snyder, first the intel chiefs and now the military commanders repeated assessments that North Korea will not give up its nuclear weapons. Why do you think is that?
Because they don't think that the North Koreans are going to give up their nuclear weapons. I mean, we just have not yet seen evidence of changes in intent, and we certainly have not seen changes in North Korean capabilities that would provide the basis upon which the intelligence community could make a different assessment.
Mm-hmm. So these skeptical assessments, while we are still continuing diplomacy with North Korea, and Ambassador, you are both in intel and diplomacy community, how does this resonate to you?
Well, this is the job of the intelligence community, truth to power. And they just present it the way they see it. And they see North Korea viewing their nuclear weapons as a path to survival of the regime. So by definition, if they give up their nuclear weapons, it puts their regime in jeopardy. So that's a very solid, I mean, based on the record and what we saw in 2017 with intercontinental ballistic missile launches, thermonuclear event, YouTube saying we'll take out New York and Seoul. I think the community is saying, look, and they're still producing fissile material for weapons. The community is saying the survival of the regime depends on nuclear weapons. So why would they give up nuclear weapons? I think that's a fair assessment. The role then of diplomacy is to work that issue and to get North Korea to understand that giving up their nuclear weapons will give them greater security. It will permit the survival of the regime. And that's why security assurances, economic development assistance, those issues are so important for North Korea. So I don't think one is exclusive of the other. I think one complements the other, and it gives more of a responsibility to the diplomats. Your question is a good one. For the diplomats, that puts more pressure, I think, but good pressure, because those are the core issues, giving up their nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm. And is this also pressure for North Korea?
Well, it is pressure for North Korea in the sense that they can tell that we have not yet accepted their words as evidence of a change in intent. And so we need to see actions in connection with those words in order to be able to adjust the assessment. It sends North Korea a clear message that our expectations with regards to what they are actually going to have to do have not changed.
And does this also relieve some burden off of President Trump and the negotiating team?
I do think that the set of expectations about the possibility of denuclearization has been set so low that it makes it a lot easier for President Trump to be able to claim a victory if the North Koreans are willing to take the first step. Now, the big problem there is that we also don't want President Trump to declare total victory just because the North Koreans have taken a first step. We need to push this process through to completion.
And also the military commander said that there is no change in North Korean military posture, even though there were confidence-building measures across the border. So what is the takeaway here?
Well, I mean, conventional weapons are important. What the North Koreans have in the Kaesong Heights with artillery, long-range artillery, those are important indicators. But what I also heard, I was recently in Seoul, is that there's been movement on the DMZ, movement in regards to demining exercises, work on the northern limit line, also work on ensuring that there's an area of the DMZ that is a peace area, where no weapons are being, if you will, held by either side. So I think there have been some small steps that are confidence-building steps. But I think overall, when the commanders are talking about the overall nuclear and conventional posture of North Korea, they're saying it hasn't changed. I think that's a fair assessment.
And then the commanders also said that North Korean winter military exercises continue. And whereas North Korea is very adamant about U.S. and South Korean joint military exercises. So should we also ask North Korea to stop its exercises?
Well, I think that what we'd like to see is, just as we have changed the scope and size and timing of some of our exercises, we would like to see reciprocity from the North Koreans. We would like to see them take an equivalent step. And thus far, their failure to adjust their exercises, I think, will also serve to provide additional evidence of intent to those who are trying to assess what North Korea is trying to do. And the assessment of intent is going to be a negative assessment based on the fact that we don't see a change in North Korea's exercise posture.
And Ambassador, last question. South Korea's presidential advisor said that North Korea may ask the United States to have some military cooperation as confidence-building measures. And this is very hard for me to imagine because U.S. and North Korea has been enemies for so long. What is your take?
Well, cooperation, there could be a dialogue. I think that's important to have a dialogue. I think having our respective military commanders sit down and talk about the conventional threat to South Korea, certainly to Seoul, that North Korea poses with their conventional weapons, if you will, to Kaesong Heights and other areas. I think those are important issues. And I think there's value for a mill-to-mill dialogue on these things as the diplomats move forward with the denuclearization and the security assurances, economic development assistance. The mill-to-mill officers need to get together to ensure that there's deconfliction in case there's a misunderstanding or tension becomes very high. So I see value in that.
Well, on that note, we'll move on to our next segment. Now time for the photo moment, time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. Today we have a picture of Chairman Kim receiving applause during a performance by the State Merited Chorus on the 71st founding anniversary of the Korean People's Army. Former North Korean Deputy Ambassador to UK Tae Young-ho commented, "This picture reminds him of European royalty rather than a communist leader." Scott, what's your reaction?
Well, Tae's comment is very interesting, but this is a really interesting venue. And of course, we see Kim Jong-un's elevation. I think that's probably about the level that the North Koreans would like to inscribe in all pictures associated with Kim Jong-un in public events. It is a striking picture of the verticality of the hierarchy in North Korea.
Ambassador?
I'm not surprised at all. I mean, there's no question that this is the Kim family, and this is Kim Jong-un, and this is the deification. This is the respect they're showing to their leader. And yeah, I'm not surprised by this picture. I would be surprised if indeed there wasn't this sort of response to the presence of Kim Jong-un at an event of this type.
Well, Mr. Snyder, Ambassador Ditrani, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eun Jung Cho. Join us next week for more analysis on North Korea.